I just finished reading the preface to Black Looks by Bell Hooks. This is a reissue of a collection that's basically a bunch of her like critical essays on like race representation in media. The synopsis at the back says her focus is on spectatorship, in particular the way blackness and black people are experienced in literature, music, television, and especially film. And her aim is to create a radical intervention into the way we talk about race and representation. So obviously I was like intrigued by it. Also, I really like this cover and it's wild. Okay, let me try to break down my thoughts. Again, this is only the preface. I think the reason why this is taking me aback is the preface is written by her like to accompany the reissue. So it's basically her being like, here's all these collected texts and I still feel like this is a conversation that's worthwhile, and this is why. And then I'm reading these very like reductionist like thinking, and I'm a bit nervous to basically like read the essays in this because I'm nervous about like the sorts of ways that she's going to talk about race and representation. She talks about how the point is to sort of see the way that like black advancement and like black self-determination is constantly pulled back by the way we are constantly represented in media. There's already like this dichotomy that she's presenting of positive representations and negative representations. Thinking about like representation discourse and representation as what has become like a sort of movement in media, and how we're imagining the sort of liberation that representation is supposed to bring about. And I'm seeing a lack of the considerations of the like limitations of that discourse. And so in this in particular, thinking of this dichotomy of positive and negative representations and like how exactly are we determining that, and then the examples she cites are the things that make me uncomfortable. She talks about the popular film 12 Years a Slave offered diverse images of black masculinity while giving audiences the same old negative stereotypical images of naked, raped, beaten, sexually licentious black females. And I'm reading that and I'm like, huh? To me, this is the problem with like representation discourse and the idea of like good versus bad representations, or good versus bad like portrayals of a particular group of people. I'm uncomfortable with the idea that like art and media and representations of like black people or other ethnic groups, other like racial groups, other marginalized people, that the sole source of representation that can be provided is images that like uplift people. It's making me think about like the function of like art, and I guess her argument is that for black liberation, like these images have to be positive. We have to see, because like the 12 Years a Slave example is breaking my brain because I'm like, it's about slaves. Like she's like negative stereotypical images of naked, rape, beaten, sexually, and I'm like, they rape these enslaved women. Okay, calm down. So yeah, I'm like, okay, I wish you would interrogate the idea of like negative versus positive. And then she goes on to talk about RuPaul and Beyonce. Let me not even get into the whole like Bell Hooks hates Beyonce thing, but she talks about how RuPaul has created an image of black female beauty, those quotations are whatever, fine, affirming the aesthetic of long blonde straight hair, an image that suggests if I cannot be a white woman, I can at least look like a copy of the real thing. And then says that, you know, RuPaul basically made it so that a lot of female performers and like in the public eye decided to go blonde. And so she's like, this set the stage for Beyonce, a young black female singer, to rise to unprecedented stardom and wealth. And on the cover of Time, Beyonce is basically in a bone straight like blonde hairdo. And she writes, in keeping with this affirmation of whiteness, she, Beyonce, clothed in bra and panties on the cover, continues to stereotype that black females are more sexually active and loose than any other groups of women. Huh? Like, I feel like, okay, there's so many things, but thinking of this particular example, like Beyonce's own sexuality and Beyonce's own like expression of female sexual, like black women, if we're trying to run away from the negative stereotype of like being sexually promiscuous, should run the other way to like being what, like modest. And she talks about how Laverne Cox is another example of an actress who, like a black actress who wears like blonde hair and a hypersexualized body, and I'm like, Bell Hooks, let's let's take a deep breath. Let's take a deep breath. And yeah, she talks about how recently attending Black church on a Sunday in which the children's choir was singing, I observed that almost every little black girl had some form of long fake hair. While much of it was straight, even the fake braids were excessively long and therefore heavy enough to destroy natural roots. Okay, babe. Clearly, these are not simply cases of personal style and choice. They are decisions informed by all that popular media tells us is desirable and beautiful. And then she talks about the cover image and how when the first edition of Black Looks was published, she chose an image of a young brown-skinned a young brown-skinned Native American woman for the cover. It's also like image to challenge like narrow definitions of what black people can look like and what is beautiful. This new edition has, so this image is of a black native woman, Sarah Oldham. This is Bell Hooks' maternal grandmother. And so she says that this image is a visual narrative challenging us to see black females as subjects and not objects. Like the ideas in the book, her direct gaze invites interrogation, contestation, daring us to look and see differently. And so this was another like dichotomy that I was like, I wish she would go deeper in like negative, like the binary of like negative versus positive and then subject versus object. What in this image exactly makes this us being able to view this woman as a subject as opposed to an object, and then would on the flip side a more, just going off of like what she's talked about and like what she's criticized in preface, but like a sexualized or a sexual image of a black woman, if she used that on the cover, like would that be a black woman as an object? Like I was just like, it just broke my brain, but like in the bad way. Yeah, I don't know, like this might have been a very like useful conversation at the time. Obviously we've moved from certain reactions to the kinds of messages that we were told, like white supremacist notions, thinking of like Negroland and, you know, Margaret Jefferson on like that 1950s 1960s ideal of what black women should look like, or at least the black women who were like in proximity to like privilege, what they had to, like how they had to look. But I just kind of like, you know, this idea that like natural versus like fake, or wanting to be like blonde or something, that these are supposed to be negative images of black women. I'm just, yeah, I don't know, it just, for me, it's that idea of like the representation discourse and its limited liberatory potential, because then we end up with works like this, or at least a preface like this. I mean, not because I haven't read the whole work, but we end up with a preface like this that is basically kind of like policing is a strong word but basically like criticizing actions of black women that seem to be falling in line with like white supremacist notions of like beauty and womanhood, and I feel like it's a lot more complicated than that. I kind of wish the preface wasn't as binary as it is. I don't know, this is so disappointing. You know, I'm not going to knock it before reading. I'm sure there's going to be like some very interesting and very like important things here. Like one of the essays I've read, Eating the Other, I had to read for one of my classes. I'm pretty sure there's going to be some really interesting, albeit like dated works and like dated like critiques in here. I'm so disappointed by that preface and by that sort of like narrow critical view of representation. So here's Middlemarch by George Eliot, a classic. I've, you know, obviously heard like really good things about this one. It's a thick book. I think it would be like an accomplishment to get to Middlemarch. I saw this classic cover of Orlando by Virginia Woolf and I couldn't resist. I've actually never finished reading any Virginia Woolf. I have a couple of her books and I've started, what's the really popular one about the woman planning a party? I never finished reading it, but I saw this cover, I really couldn't resist it, and I was like, yeah, I've heard really good things about Orlando as well. It would also be a good novel to get to. But the main draw was this cover. I'm not always obsessed with like some of these new releases covers, but like the one for Orlando is really good. Oh, Doris Lesson's The Golden Notebook. I've heard so many good things about this novel. Actually, when I posted this on my Bookstagram, Jamie Hood of Very Hot Mom Reads fame said that this is one of her favorite novels, and she's read it like multiple times. So I honestly was thinking that this would be a good read for the summer. Like, it's huge, it's very thick, it's like almost 700 pages. But I don't know, I think it would be a good sort of like, I kind of like these like really huge epics for the summer. And finally, I picked up Teju Cole's Black Paper. I only have his novel Open City, but I follow him on Instagram, and he posts his photography, and there's an essay of his that I read about Palestine that I thought was really great. So I was like, it'll be fun to read some more of his writing. So this is on like art and him being like a critic. Yeah, there's a bunch of like pictures in here, and so I thought it might be interesting.
Started to ring again. And it rang, and it wouldn't stop ringing. And I lay in that hospital bed. I was unable to move or run from that sound, and still it kept ringing louder and louder. And the sound of that was like Skipper screaming for help.